უპირველეს ყოვლისა, მადლობა დაინტერესებისთვის. ჩვენ დღეს სტუმრად გვყავს საქართველოს ძალიან დიდი მეგობარი, პროფესორი ზდისლავ კრასნოდებსკი, რომელსაც ძალიან ბევრი აქვს გაკეთებული ჩვენი ქვეყნისთვის. განსაკუთრებით კარგად თანამშრომლობს საქართველოს ტექნიკურ უნივერსიტეტთან, ჩვენს უნივერსიტეტთან და ზუგდიდის შოთა მესხეს უნივერსიტეტთან. ჩვენ ბევრ ერთობლივ პროექტს ვაკეთებთ და მომავალშიც ვართ საკმაოდ საინტერესო პროექტებზე შეთანხმებული. ამ მაგალითისთვის გეტყვით, ამჟამადაც ტარდება საერთაშორისო საზაფხულო სკოლა საირმეში, ბატონ ჩვენი სტუმრის მიერ ორგანიზებული და დაფინანსებული, უშუალოდ ჩარევით დაფინანსებული, რომელშიც 4 ჩვენი სტუდენტი იღებს მონაწილეობას, სხვა უნივერსიტეტებიდან 3 სტუდენტი არის. ეს პროექტი და არა მსგავსი პროექტები მომავალშიც ბევრი გაგრძელდება და ეს ინფორმაცია აუცილებლად გაჟღერდება და საჯარო იქნება და მოგიწოდებთ აქტიურობისათვის. ამისათვის ახლა ერთ-ერთი მთავარი პირობა უცხოენის ცოდნა არის ნამდვილად ან ინგლისურის, ან გერმანულის რაღაც ასეთი. თუმცა ეს მე მგონი აღარაა პრობლემა დღევანდელ საქართველოს საბედნიეროდ და ამ ხრივ ჩვენც უფრო გააქტიურება უნდა შევძლოთ. მე რამდენიმე სიტყვას ინგლისურად მადლობას გადავეტყვი სტუმარს და შემდეგ გადავცემ სიტყვას. ლექცია იქნება ინგლისურად, თუმცა შემდეგ როცა კითხვა-პასუხის რეჟიმზე როცა გადავალთ, შეგიძლიათ ქართულადაც დასვათ შეკითხვები და რომლის თარგმნასაც ჩვენ მოახერხებთ. So, dear Professor, thank you for coming. It's our pleasure to have the possibility to host you here at Agagzerteli State University. The main thing that is we, as a country, we are facing quite a number of challenges, and we are trying to reach the European, Europe in general, but also the European Union. So that to know better what does it mean to be European is quite important for our new generation. And this lecture you prepared to talk about is very important, very interesting for us. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest. Thank you everything you've done for Georgia and for our university too. And floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for invitation. I was many times already in Georgia, but it is my first time in Kutaisi. And the weather was not the best one yesterday, but this is I always impressed by your country. And probably Professor Avkadze mentioned that I am not an academician because I am now a member of the European Parliament. So I am also trying, this is definitely my personal program, but also I think my country, but also many of my political group and also many of my colleagues from other group that Georgia will be also a part of European Union soon. So we can talk also about later about all this thing. You probably have questions. I might also mention that I have an intern from Georgia. Now there's a young lady. She's a lawyer and she's in my office at internship and so on. But my topic, what I wanted to discuss with you today, also with you, is the questions of Europeanness of Europe. What makes Europe Europe? Yeah, what is the distinctive character of Europe? This is, of course, awkward questions, and answers are not possible. And I will talk in 3 parts about 3 meanings. If this is too boring, then please signal me, and then I can shorten the language. As a first would be just that I start with geography, I go to the culture, and then I go to the politics, and then some words about what is the situation now in the European Union, Europe as European Union. And I will make some references also to some authors and to some problems. Actually, I discussed already with both professors, my friends, also in the privately. But I wanted to start, that when I was young assistant young students in the 70s in Poland, then my generation dreamt of a return to Europe. There was a very catchy phrase, you know, we wanted to return to Europe. And in the 80s, the notion of Mitteleuropa, especially here we are in the room, is organized by Austrian, but it was very intense discussion at the times about Central Europe. What is Central Europe? What is Mitteleuropa? And especially Austrian, but also Polish, Czech, and Hungarian intellectuals wrote about this. So, and this notion of Mitteleuropa on Central Europe as a forgotten region of Europe occupied by another non-European Eastern civilization returned. Just before the fall of communism, Central Europe became fashionable in something for snob. If you wanted to be, you know, very open intellectual, then you should be interested in Central Europe. It was a result of the freedom movement of this time. I don't know if they are known. Committee for Defense of the Workers in Poland, Charta 77 in Czech Republic, Solidarity movement. But of course the Nobel Prize in Literature for Czesław Miłosz, it is a distinguished Polish poet. At the beginning of 80s, he received this Nobel Prize. And also Milan Kundera with his famous essay on hijacked Europe, published in New York Review of Books, contributed to this popularity. And at that time, self-respecting Western intellectuals, if he or she did not want to be considered as provincial, had to visit Prague, Krakow, or Budapest. This admiration reached the highest point in 1999 when the collapse of communism began. And the contribution of Poles, Hungarians, Czech, and other nations to the reunification of the continent was very appreciated. And today, the Poles, the Czech, and the Hungarians, and the other people are already in Europe. Yeah? We are back in this sense, back in Europe. Yeah? We have returned. But sometimes the question is that Europe we wanted to return to? Yeah? Is that what we dreamed in the 70s? Did we really mean Europe? What kind of Europe? Or was it about the West, to be a part of the West? And how these two notions of Europe, of the West, relate to each other? Yeah? This is the question. What is, yeah. So, and then start what is the Europe? And the simplest answer to the question is what Europe is given by geography. Even great German philosopher Hegel, and Professor Mamuka Beryashvili is the best specialist in Hegel in Georgia, but also probably in Central Europe in general. He begins his lecture on the philosophy of history with simple geographical characterization. First of all, he distinguishes between two worlds. The old world, the new world, which has not yet made its mark in history. This is America, of course, United States for him. So he said, okay, I am not dealing with this, omits it. It's not really the part of his consideration. And there is an old world. And it consists of the three parts of the earth: Africa, Asia, and Europe. But then he really only confines himself to showing the differences between Europe and Asia. Africa, according to him, is the blank page of history. So it is not really politically correct today, yeah, to say that Africa. Even so, it is a part of the old world. So he writes, for instance, we leave America not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. And historical moment in it, for instance, Egypt, of course, as it is only, does not belong to African spirit. What we properly understand about Africa, he writes, is the unhistorical, undeveloped spirit still involved in the conditions of mere nature and which had to be presented here only as on the threshold of the world history. So actually, Africa is not interesting for. And so that leaves us only with Asia in Europe. But here is where the problem arises. Do we know where is the border of Europe between Asia and Europe? What does Europe end? Where does Europe end in the East and Asia begins? And the school answers, I don't know how it's in Georgian schools, in my school was that the border is Urals and Caucasus. So here we are on the border probably. And then I was never in Europe. Yeah, but,
in Europe.
yeah,
In Asia.
yes. This is sometimes this Italian colleagues maintains that from the northern part of Italy that Africa begins with Rome. Yeah, so it's but yeah, this sometimes. But then there's questions: is Russia therefore a part of Europe? We discussed this. Yeah.
Geographically,
in geographical sense, partly, yes. But then the idea of return to Europe under communism, which I mentioned here, would be meaningless. So we were in the Europe. Why should we return if Russia is a part of the Europe? Yeah. So the questions of Russians belonging to Europe is contentious and complicated. Yeah, and the closer a European nation come to Russia, the more it doubted its Europeanism. Yeah. So, for instance, Milan Kundera wrote in his essay that Central and Eastern European intellectuals see Russia as something different from Europe. He writes, on the eastern border of West, more than anywhere else, Russia is seen not just as one more European power, but as singular civilization and other civilization. But it is different, for instance, in Germany, even more different in France. When they say Eastern Europe, they say, okay, it's Russia. But most politicians thinkers also rejected the thesis that Russia belonged to Europe, especially in 19th century and so. Interesting in this regard is the position of distinguished Polish historian Oskar Halecki. He published a very influential book. He's influential also now. That was published in the 50s in the 20th century. This is a book about limits and partition of Europe. And he emphasized on the one hand that a part of Russia is a part of Europe, and this is, according to him, Eastern Europe in proper sense, while at the same time he was sharing the thesis of Russia's culture and distinctiveness. So he wrote, for instance, in this book, the European part of Soviet Union constitutes, together with its Asiatic part, a Euro-Asian world power with its own culture dominated by Russian elements, and its own way of life, the Soviet system. So communism was also seen, and this is the other very interesting but also difficult question to discuss. The communism was seen in Central Europe as stemming from Russian history, not as a rupture of continuity, like Solzhenitsyn, for instance. Kundera, for instance, asked himself, is communism the negation of Russian history or its fulfillment? And he said, centrally, it is both. It is negation, the negation, for example, of its religiosity, Russian religiosity, but its fulfillment of centralized tendency and its imperial dreams. In Poland is a very known book. There are seven volumes published direct before the war, 39, from Jan Kucharzewski about Russian history, and it's called that he shows this modern Russian history that this is the way from the white Tsarat to the red Tsarat. Yeah, to Tsar, yeah, Tsar is the system. Yeah, Tsar, that it is some kind of the tradition of the Russian despotism is transformed into communism. Today, there is no inclination to speak of Russia as a part of Europe. This is new, I think. It's a couple of years ago was when I talked to my French colleagues from European Parliament. They were very influenced, actually, by idea that Russia is a part of European history, that Russia is defending the traditional culture, family, Christianity, and so on. There's, as you probably know, in Paris, there's a big center of Russian culture and so on. But today, the otherness, cultural otherness of Russia is fully discovered. The brutal aggression against Ukraine and committed crimes reminder of those features of Russian civilization, which the Poles already spoke and wrote about 19th century. For instance, Adam Mickiewicz, great Polish poet, in his Parisian lecture on Zygmunt Krasiński, his political writings. If you Adam Mickiewicz was a professor in Collège de France, the first professor in the Slavonic literature, and if I just wrote an essay about him and Krasiński, about Polish Romanticism, but if you read what he said in French to the French audience at this time, you can repeat this today as a warning. You know that is. So currently, Western academics, especially specialists in Slavic culture and literature, historians, political scientists, confess their intellectual sin and hastily revise their view on Russia. German specialists become conscious of their naive Russophilism and are quibbling about the cultural causes in Russian aggressions. So it's a critical self-assessment of the. There are many of my colleagues, I know them personally, but now they think that they may make also some intellectual mistake. And Professor Eva Thompson, she is a Polish-American and author of a very known book on the imperialist ideology in Russian literature, has proposed decolonization of the Slavic studies at the United States. She is professor in the Rice University now. Retired, but still, as of this book called Imperial Knowledge was published 20 years ago. It was the first book actually when she showed us in these great writers, Russian writers, we see this imperialist tendency. But she writes now, why about this decolonization? Why should such a process take place? Firstly, because the current situation does not reflect the real weight and importance of literary and cultural activity in non-Germanic Central Europe and Eastern Europe. The war in Ukraine began to tear off the curtain that obscured a world of which American and European students of Slavic cultures have had no idea. And secondly, because the war in Ukraine is rearranging relatively political weight of non-Germanic Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Yes, I do recognize the importance of nuclear missiles in the Russia possession, but I also recognize the realities of Ukraine's courage and willingness to sacrifice for the preservation of Ukraine's identity. I also recognize the richness of intellectual landscapes in places that until now have been dismissed as Eastern Europe. So it's really, you know, they sometimes not observed that also this Ukraine war against Ukraine, that change also, you know, the kind some specialists in the Western Europe see, the Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Europe, and also. So in this way, we already moved to another meaning of Europe, recognizing that the political and cultural boundaries do not coincide with geographical ones. At that time, from 1945 to 1889, only a part of Europe in the geographical sense was the West in political sense. And the countries of Central Europe wanted to return to Europe, and that's meant actually wanted to become the West in the sense of this time. So the two concepts were actually identical. So, for instance, Kundera wrote in this essay, what does Europe mean to Hungarian, a Czech, a Pole? For 1,000 years, the nation belonged to the part of Europe rooted in Roman Christianity. They have participated in every period of its history. For them, the word Europe does not represent a phenomenon of geography, but a spiritual notion synonymous with the word West. The moment Hungary is no longer European, that is no longer Western, it is driven for its destiny beyond its own history, it loses the essence of its identity. So in this time, there was actually the West and Europe were synonyms, yeah, for the perspective of Milan Kundera. But today this is also a different situation, because there is a more emphasis on the differences between North America and Europe. Is European culture different, what we also discuss, and American culture? Is America something you know? And Europe, especially in the French interpretation, you probably read some, some expressions by, or the speeches by President Macron, is supposed to be different, and it should be more sovereign entity vis-à-vis the USA. Now there is a talk about, sovereignty of Europe, and especially French politicians, French intellectuals, and this is also sovereignty in vis-à-vis the United States. So the West is no longer seen as completely homogeneous. Europe is different than America. But when we coming back to Europe and try to characterize this civilization, and so the question is, what is the culturally Europe? So the standard answer is that Europe is founded on the heritage of the Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Christianity. And this foundation is symbolized by three cities: Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. And the problem is that this cultural context of these places, symbolized, has never formed as smooth whole. So our tradition is not, is a constant dialogue, sometimes even a struggle between these elements and also inside them. So if somebody say, okay, we have a heritage, Roman law, Christianity, and Greek philosophy, then it sounds very good, but the problem is that these elements are very, sometimes in the struggle or in the conflict. For instance, that had always been a tension between philosophy and Christianity. As Joseph Ratzinger was the later Pope Benedict XVI, rightly pointed out, Christianity is not Platonism for the poor. So we can find the idea of God in Plato, but it is something different than what is in Bible, yeah? And Bible, and yeah. So Rome and Jerusalem were also at the first and fundamental opposition. After all, Christianity, according to Gibbon, was one of the factors of the fall of Roman Empire. So the formula of the three cities also ignores the fact that Christianity was the foremost, the important things for emergence of the European civilization. This civilization was built on Latin Christian foundation. So I quote Ferdinand Seibt. He's a was very known medieval specialist in Middle Ages in Germany. He wrote a book, Foundation of Europe, Begründung für Europas, and he said, for a long time, Europe was more or less identical with the Catholic Church, a distinct from Orthodox, Greek Christianity, or as Luther said, the Orient. But precisely since Luther times, this distinction no longer really applies, because a part of Western Christendom was no longer Catholic, and the good part of Eastern Christendom became Turkish at the time. So this civilization, you probably, when we go then back to the 8th or the 10th century of the geographical Europe, was called Christianitas. And this Western Latin Christianity took shape after the fall of Roman Empire in the area of the present-day France. And firstly, it neither encompassed the entire geographical part of the world we call Europe, not it was limited to Europe alone. Over time, however, it acquired territorial significance and made the part of the world inhabited by Christian, and not by all Christian, but those who belong to Roman Church. And if you look, I skip this, if we look also on Kundera, but you see the same idea. Also, Samuel Huntington, this is very famous political scientist, wrote in the middle of the 90s a book and asked Clash of Civilization, that there is now, after the clash of ideologies, communism versus capitalism versus Western world, there was a question, where's the border in the East for the Europe? And he said, this is this religious border. He saw a civilization boundary in the east of Europe between countries of Western Christianity, Protestant and Catholic, and the Orthodox Church. But this is, of course, I would not agree with him. Yeah. Firstly, these are questions, if after decades of secularization, we can still attribute such determining force for whole and social life to religion. Moreover, this concept would exclude Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, of course, countries that are European and what to be Western, I suppose. Yeah, but you have to correct me if there's. So, and there's also, of course, that also some problem that in addition, since Latin civilization did not immediately embrace Central and Eastern Europe, which was mainly populated by Slavic people, there was also a thesis of their cultural difference. For instance, Leopold von Ranke, or I don't know, I can also quote here once again Hegel. He said also, for instance, that he excludes Slavs, Slavonic people from European history and from the March of Absolute Spirit. For instance, he wrote, we find moreover in the east of Europe the great Slavonic nation, which settlement extended west of the Elbe to Danube, but those people did indeed find kingdoms and founded kingdoms and sustained spirited conflicts with the various nations to come across their path. Sometimes as an advance guard, they took part in the struggle between Christian Europe and unchristian Asia. The Poles even liberated beleaguered Vienna from the Turks, and Slavonic people have to some extent been drawn with the sphere of Occidental reason. Yet this entire body of the peoples remain excluded from consideration because it has not appeared as independent element in the series of phases that reason has assumed to the world, and so on. Yeah? So it's like about he excluded Africa from the history, but he also has some hesitation to include Eastern Europe or the Central Europe to this. And I think that is, of course, this vision of the history is based of the it's not adequate to our knowledge of the European history. Also, Hegel himself must have known about the Battle of Grunwald, which changed the fate of the Central Europe, the Polish-Lithuanian Union, the 13 wars, the Peace of the Torun, and that actually Prussia, he was very connected with the Prussia. Prussia was fiefdom of Poland, yeah. And also, University of Königsberg was granted its privilege by Polish King Sigismund the Old. He must have heard about Constitution of 3rd May and about Kościuszko, figure now at this time and the both sides of Atlantic. So I think that in this narration, which in a way is still influential, there is this omission are not accidental, yeah, because here narration is based first of all about I think about negation or negation of the some kind of republican tradition. For instance, he wrote negatively about Magna Carta in England and the fact that we in Poland we have an elective monarchy, but also about his negative attitude to Catholicism. If we look precisely, he actually considered also only the Protestant religion that can be founded. Could be founded, you know, on this the modern state, how this state considered should be, yeah. So it's as I said, this the way seeing of history is incompatible with the history of Europe as presented by historians today, but we still can find a similar narration or the narrative in many other thinkers. For instance. I don't know if here are the students of sociology, but there is a great American sociologist, very influential in the 50s of 20th century, Talcott Parsons. And this Talcott Parsons also has presented his theory, structure of functionalism, his view how the history of Europe can be generalized. And he first of all, he has said that the West for him initially is only the western part of Europe and the European of Carolingians. Then the modernity means, and then modernity means the radical division of Europe, and they begin, according to him, the modern structural patterns crystallize in the northwestern part of Europe, and then appeared a secondary pattern in northeastern part with the center of gravity in Prussia. Yeah? And in opposite to Hegel, Parsons was, however, aware of the limitation of the Prussian modernity. He writes, for instance, that it was actually a reactionary state, and he sees this peculiarity in the rule of the Calvinist reality over the obedient Lutheran population and the efficiency of the goal achieving system. So I think this is the complication. I just wanted to, we can also go more in the details how the European history is seen. You just see how complicated to see from the different narrative ways what is actually the content, what is the peculiarity, how the different part of the Europe relates to each other. And this is also, for this reason, complicated, because European history is not continuity, we know this, but it's also characterized by ruptures of continuity. And the some, well, especially in sociology, but in part of sociology, some of thinkers, some of the intellectuals, philosophers or sociologists, they see modernity as a fundamental break with all characteristic of previous time. So great division. And there's sometimes a narrative. I know if anybody of you were in Brussels in the history of the European, in the House of the European History, and it is actually, I think, the same impression. You have that history of Europe begins actually with modernity. This means Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, a beginning pillar, and the background is the enlightenment. So it's but once again, these ruptures and this, I think that this theory that we have just this very deep division between pre-modern and modern. Modern, that means 19th century in this sense, it's not a proper way actually to approach the problem. What is characteristic from European history and what European history is. So, but now then I move to the third concept of the Europe, because some can say, yeah, it is very interesting what you said, but it not very significant, yeah, for today, yeah. It says of secondary importance because, after all, returning to Europe meant to be integrated into political economic structures, yeah. And so this cultural, philosophical consideration is something for us, yeah, professors of the, but for you, yeah, for most of the people is something, yeah. Yeah, for instance, also religion, I mentioned this, had no this differentiating power. Philosophy is not probably united element in contemporary Europe. What is Europe? Europe is mostly political entity. Yeah, and what unites today Europeans is politics, pursuit of the integration. European countries are united by certain general principles and values enshrined in the treaties of European Union. And today, when we are talking about Europe, if you hear, for instance, what Ursula von der Leyen, other politicians, when I talk Europe, I am European, that means that actually they identify Europe with Union. To be today enthusiastic European means that you support the European integration, you are for European Union. So where are the borders of the Union? This is of the Europe. Then when the ends the political border of the influence of the Union. So in this sense, Georgia is in period of transition, yeah, because it's associated country, but we look always from Union point of view, we always say, yeah, there are members, there are candidates, there are associate countries, but the center is, yeah, probably, yeah, political. This is interesting because, on the other hand, if we look, then Europe was never actually politically united in the past. Yeah? There was no one state there was always the idea of renovatio imperii. There was the idea that we have to have such a unity. Yeah? We have to revival the Roman Empire, because at the beginning we are together, but also in Byzantium, of course, yeah, and so on. And there was, if we look as a historian or sociologist, there was always a loose form of unity. Res Publica Christiana, the Holy Empire, some kind of the feeling of solidarity of Christian nation. So who firstly united politically Europe? Napoleon, probably. Napoleon, you will see the mask of Napoleon too. Yeah, yeah, yes. And then, yeah, in some way, of course, also Germany Hitler also attempted to unite Europe, yeah. And after the Second War, there was also some kind of the, yeah, order beyond the European nation, yeah, also in the 19th century after Vienna Congress in 1915, yeah. But evidently, there is a new phase after the fall of the Berlin Wall. On one hand, we had this kind of the freedom, also dissolution of some federal states yet Yugoslavia, but it's opened the way for the political integration. Yeah? European Economic Community turned into European Union, and since Maastricht Treaty integration has been accelerated. Yeah? We have it's emerged the Union institution, the European Commission, European Parliament, the Court of Justice of the European Union became more and more influential. And now what also many of my people in Poland do not understand how peculiar this union is, how different it is. There is the question, is it a state, European Union? Is the state like Soviet Union was the state? It is federal state, or is this what is? Yeah, it's a, And I think that the currently political order in Europe has a specific and unique character. On one hand, it still includes states, internationally recognized as sovereign, which pursue their own foreign, defense, and economic policies. On the other hand, by joining together the European Union, European states have relinquished some of their powers. Yeah? They have transferred part of their sovereignty into common pool to preserve and strengthen it. But the Union has to have limited competences. It is supposed to deal only with the issue that cannot be dealt by the individual member states. So it is not politically sovereign organism, but in a way international organization, a bloc of states. Its decision-making power is based on this transfer of competences from states. So in a way, it is borrowed power. Yeah? And now we have, of course, this is like the model list. Yeah? But since 2 decades, we have also the process in which this accumulation of the governance power has led the EU, so this institution, to treat such borrowed sovereignty as its own. Yeah? And they extend more and more the competences. Yeah? And so not only Georgia is the transition, yeah, you have to make a choice and to go in there and to become a member of the Union or to not. I don't know what the alternative. But also Europe is changing. When we entered the European Union 2004, was a different union that it is now. Yeah. So it is something with, and there are of course now tendencies to centralize, to go more in the direction of the state, to strengthen the competences of the Commission, of the European Parliament, and so. For instance, there is now the proposition to put a pressure on the Council to convene a convention to change the treaties, because there is a thesis that actually the treaties, how they already are not adequate to the political processes in reality. So we have to change the treaties. We have to accelerate this this process of the evolution of European Union. And European Parliament in the Committee of Constitutional Affairs, AFCO, I am also a member of this committee, they prepared such a resolution of the European Parliament to organize this convention. Because according to European Treaty, Article 48, in order to change the treaty, you have big change of the treaty, you have to organize the convention. The convention, they are representative of states and also from civil societies. They will propose the change, and then it goes to the council, and then council agrees, and then goes to the particular states, and they have to ratify this. This is like it was with Lisbon Treaty. And these changes which are now proposed are very fundamental. For instance, they would like to change the name of the institution. For instance, that the European Commission should be called Executive Commission, that should be also President of the European Union. There are some they would like to, that will be the chair, the president of the council will be at the same time the president of the European Commission. So there are also some other proposal, and the most probably important one, politically now very controversial, is, as you probably heard, that we should resign from unanimity principle in the questions of the foreign policy and taxes. Last week, there was Chancellor Scholz was in in Strasbourg and gave a speech to us, and he repeated actually this requirement. And this is, of course, the argument behind it is that you know, we are living in the world in which China and Russia and United States, they are big empires, and we need then to take the decision more quickly, and it cannot be that one state can, you know, prevent by veto, you know, to taking such a decision. Yeah, and we have just recently there was a problem with Hungary. Hungary had a little different politics toward Russia and so on. So but also there are such a very characteristic changes proposed by the parliament. For instance, in the Article 2, the treaty, there is a mention that that should be equality between men and women. And they wanted to change this equality between genders, because they suppose that there are more genders than only these two. So equality of gender, and many are such a proposition. Also, Article 7, which is very important from Poland, because there's a question of what you can do if one member of the one member state is, according to the other, not functioning according to European values, how the procedure should be like. Yeah. So it's we don't know how it ends, because it's probably will be next year. We have a European election. There would be also political discussion again about this. There were 3 interesting speeches. One was given by a couple of years ago by President Macron in Sorbonne, when he first time articulated this idea of sovereign Europe which is not dependent on the other, also in economical terms, energy and so on. There was a speech given by Chancellor Scholz, not only last week, but before, in Prague, in University of Charles University, when he said about this more centralization. And there was a very interesting speech given by Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, at the University of Heidelberg, when he actually proposed something different. Yeah, something different. Then he said, actually, what we need, we have, I think the common elements between all these speeches is that everybody, Scholz, Macron now, and Morawiecki, all agree we should enlarge European Union. We should do very quickly open European Union to Ukraine, Moldova, Baltic, West Baltic states, and also Georgia is mentioned. Yeah. So this is a common, but what Prime Minister Morawiecki said, actually we need not more power to the European Institute, to European Commission or European Parliament. We need base this, you know, on the nation, and this nation, it's and also to acknowledge this diversity of the Union. And this is actually what is also my position. I think that we can preserve European civilization only. We cannot, first of all, construct this Europe only on based only on institution in the law. So we need this cultural background. But what the history, what the first part of my speech is actually, what is the conclusion of this? That this history is very diverse. Yeah. So I think that we can only preserve European civilization if we embrace this diversity. Our historical heritage, which is common, is transformed in the national context. And all nations have added their culture to our European cultural stock. So European nations show a familiar resemblance in the Wittgenstein sense. So what is this family resemblance. There is no common element, but various features are repeated here and there. So if we look at the family, extended family, you see there's some similarity. But it is not that there's the one trait, it is in many phases, but a different family. So it's no common element, but there are some elements they are repeated itself. Yeah, this is why we see that Georgia also is, of course, European in this sense. This was not a family fund of consent, love, but family. And I think that that is also a big difference to the way of the integration Soviet Union was. And once again, on the end, I would like to quote Kundera. He said about at this time in the 80s of the 20th century about the difference between Central Europe and Russia. And he said, nothing could be more foreign to Central Europe and its passion for variety than Russia. And how is Russia according to him? Uniform, standardizing, centralizing, determined to transform every nation of its empire, the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, the Armenians, the Georgians, the Latvians, the Lithuanians, and others into single Russian people. Or, as is more commonly expressed in this age of generalized verbal mystification, into single Soviet people. And so, I think that we should not, against the spirit of Europe, make the same mistake. Strive to produce, like some of my colleagues, European nation united by secular ideology. But always remember that our diversity, also our religious tradition, our national tradition, are one of the sources of Europe's strength. Thank you.
სიმართლე გითხრათ, ასე მრავალმხრივ წარმოდგენილი ევროპა მე ერთ მოხსენებას შემოსვენილი არ მქონდა. შეკითხვები შეგიძლიათ თუ შეგიძლიათ უცხო ენაზე კარგი, თორა და ქართულად დასვით და მე ჩვენ გადავუთარგმნით თქვენთვის საინტერესო. წანეთ, ოღონდ სახელი და გვარის თქვით და სპეციალობა. რა ვიცი, როგორც თქვენ
So it's, of course, important questions, and these questions about how Georgian government have to behave in this situation is it should be Georgian answer. Yeah, so it's, I always hesitated to be, you know, we have a regular report on the situation in the different countries who would like to join the European Union. I was also shadow rapporteur, now the report about Serbia. Serbia is also a problem because, so we can only advise. I am also very, as opposite to some of my colleagues, I do not like, you know, to say that we know that the better and to impose some solution. But I think that in this situation, it is very important to preserve unity. I was in a way, I was less optimistic than actually it turned out, because I thought that, you know, after Russian aggression, that there are different, also these cultural narratives I was talking about, that for this reason, actually, the Union will behave not so in solidarity. For instance, I was asked by Spaniards, my Spanish colleagues, yeah. For them, we in Warsaw very exotic, you know, and to say what is. But on the end, we behave as there is a sanction. In generally, all the countries condemn the Russia aggression. All the countries understand we have to have a common position. Even Hungary, which sometimes have a different opinion, Russia is on the end accepted the sanction. Yeah, there's always, like in European politics, it's always that there is a kind of negotiation, there's a compromise. So I would say, because just recently there were also some negative description of the situation in Georgia, that Georgia now is treated a bit differently than even Moldova or Moldavia or Ukraine, that you should avoid the impression if you want to be a member of the Union, you should avoid the impression that first of all that you are the country in which there's a possibility to ignore the sanction, and that you are trying to find, you know, the position in between Russia and Union. Of course, I think that there are faults of the Union side, yeah, because this is like also in other countries. This was also, I think, in the case of Ukraine, that if we did more before that, probably there would be not this aggression of Russia. So I would say, I would myself, if I had been the Georgian politician, I would say thank you to Putin. I wouldn't use this freedom of travel without visa. Yeah, this would be my answer in the situation. But you know, if you look more precisely, of course, there's a little difference between, let's say, French president who, for a long time, thought he, in a way, can negotiate with Vladimir Putin, and they would like to have a pressure to make a peace and so some kind, yeah. And the other, like us in Poland, like Baltic states, Romanians, and the people, but also Sweden and Finland, they actually all, we are based on presupposition that in this situation, actually the Ukrainians fought for us, yeah, fight for us, yeah. This is actually what yesterday also Prime Minister Morawiecki said during the ceremony of giving the award of the Charlemagne, Charles the Great to Zelensky. So why the people in when you are in Warsaw, you hear on the street more Ukrainians and Russian language than Polish sometimes, yeah. But why the people were so received? First of all, because of our historical ties, but the other because we know if somebody is very critical, the answer is it is better to have Ukrainians women and children and take care, even if it's expensive, take care on them, and then to have Russian soldiers, troops. Yeah. So in the sense they fight for us, and I think that as a general, I would say Georgia today has really to make a decision because it's this war change, as I said, intellectually, but also politically. There is also the shift of the power. There is a change of the policy of Germany and France, evidently. And in this situation, you have to make as a very precise decision. So be more courageous to say, no, we are going if you wish, yeah, this is a will. We should go. And this is why this is very sensitive, because I think that the decision of Putin is a just provocation in this sense, and it's the test for you, yeah? And he will try to do this like also in Belarus, yeah? It's a geopolitical now competition. And so probably the clear is your policy now, the quicker would be the way to European Union, and it would be then appreciated. Yeah. President of Georgia is expected to be in Brussels, Strasbourg soon. Actually, it was announced in the last, and it would be very important if this what she will said, because the chance for Georgia, also for other countries, that the war changed also Europeans. They became more courageous and they became more realistic concerning the Russia. Mm-hmm.
მოკლედ ვიტყვი იმას, რომ ეს უნდა იყოს ქართული პასუხიო და ეს პასუხი დამოკიდებული იქნება იმაზე, თუ რა გადაწყვეტილებას იღებს ქვეყანა, ზოგადად ქვეყანა საით უნდა. და იქიდან გამომდინარე იქნება პასუხიც. თუ ის ჩვენ მას კი უნდა ვცდილობდეთ ჯერ ვის ვასე ამოვნოთ, ჯერ უნდა გადავწყვიტოთ ჩვენ რა გვინდა. თუ ჩვენ გვინდა ევროპასთან ინტეგრაცია და ევროპული მომავალი, მაშინ პუტინის ამ პროვოკაციაზე წამოგება შეიძლება არ იყოს მისაღები. თუ ჩვენი სამომავლო ხედვა არის, თქვათ, არ ვიცი, ევრაზიის კავშირი და რაღაც აი სივრცე, რასაც რუსეთი განაგებს, მაშინ იმათ ამ ქმედებებზე შესაბამისი რეაგირება ჩვენი გადაწყვეტილების შედეგი უნდა იყოს. ანუ პასუხი დამოკიდებული უნდა იყოს იმაზე, ჩვენ რა გვინდა და რას გადავწყვეტ. გვინდა ევროპისკენ, მაშინ უნდა იყოს პასუხი ადეკვატური. გვინდა რუსეთის მიერ კონტროლირებად სივრცისკენ, მაშინ ჩვენი პასუხი და უნდა იყოს შესაბამისი. და აქედან გამომდინარე, ახლა ისიც თქვა, რომ ახლა მე ვერ იტყვის ახლა ეს ადამიანი ჩვენ სათქმელს, ხო? თუმცა გვეუბნება, რომ თქვენი გადაწყვეტილება უნდა იყოს ჯერ და შემდეგ პასუხი იმაზე, რას გაცემდით ამ ასე თქვა და პუტინის ამ პროვოკაციას, რომელიც გეოპოლიტიკური კონკურენციით არის გამოწვეული, რომელიც ახლა რაღაც გადმოგვიგდო, ჩემი აზრით, სატყუ არა და ეს შეიძლება სულ თქვენ სულ ფიქრობდეთ და იმას როგორ წამოვეგებით, ეს ჩვენზე არის დამოკიდებული და ეს ჩვენი დამოკიდებულება უნდა ეფუძნებოდა ჩვენ გადაწყვეტილებას საით გვინდა და რა გვინდა.
ერთი თქვენ გითხოვდა ევროკავშირის უმეტეს
Yes, of course, it is good to be in a different organization, which and the most of the countries are in the United Nations. Almost in the next week there is a big conference that gathered all the presidents or prime minister of the European states. This is Council of Europe, which is, in Strasbourg, which is not the part of the Union. It is also very. There is now the creation of the political community, European community, which also British and Brits and Swiss is member. So it's I think it is. But there's also the questions what kind of organization it is, yeah? If it is organization, because we had these questions about how to behave to this proposal of Russia and so. It is similar, to the questions of China, because some years ago, so there was a meeting. China is very active in some countries, and it is also they have some advantages for the economic cooperation. But I think today many of the countries actually withdraws the cooperation with China because in the new geopolitical situation, the China is more and more considered as a problem. So if there is a organization which is compatible with the aim of the European community, this is okay. But what I wanted to say, this is last sentence, that European Union is a very peculiar organization. It is more than European, just international organization. It is not state, but it is more than international organization. Yeah.
Formal name.
Yeah. Yes.
And the war, Russia and Ukraine. How do you think this war does change some politically in the European Union?
Yes, I think at the moment, of course, I cannot predict, what will be the future, but there is general. I think it changed. What I said, it's make European more realistic, in assessing what Russia is. It changed, for instance, in this way. I am involved also in as a member of the European Parliament in the questions of the strengthening of defense of Europe. Yeah, so strategy to for instance, now we decided there's a fast track that the Union will give them more money for production of ammunition, because it's turned out that it is not enough ammunition in the. Or we decided, to give a special incentives to that the states can together buy some equipment which they needed because they, give their own equipment to the Ukraine. So it's a very, I think the impact is very important. There is also the thesis that there is a shift of the power in the Europe to the east, that countries like Poland, like Romania, like Baltic states, they discovered that they have a common interest, but also because of the engagement of the Americans. If you are, for instance, in Rzeszów, I was then shortly, Rzeszów in the south of Poland, close to Ukraine border, and this is the hub, the most important communication. Almost all the help, also military help to Ukraine goes through it. But if you are there, you see the American patriots there. So, and on the other hand, there is some confusion in Germany because German actually based the model also for the future, also from energy transformation, on this cheap energy from Russia. Yeah. And also some other countries, Austria and so on. And now they have to change this. Yeah, it means, and they have also to have a good relation with China because they have to export this. So it's a really deep changes in economical, cultural, and political sphere. Yeah.
And the last, what is the priority of European Union? Then in your view, have Georgia some skills to get into European Union?
Yes, of course. You are the skills of Georgia, young people, I would say. If there's no really, I would say, there's no really difference. You are European in this cultural and geographic sense. Yeah, this is the questions of the political economic integration. And what I can only say, this is not easy. Yeah, this is not easy process. Yeah. When I said we dreamed in the 70s, you know, when I was young, to be a Europe, we idolized Western world, yeah, or the European Union. It is not paradise, yeah, but it is something. You know, what is a chance? For instance, my country, I think, used this chance because developed very well. But with some problems. And one of the problems, let's say, you see, because there are 27 countries, sometimes with a different geographic situation. So when we say about this Green Deal transformation to renewables, then of course for Portugal, this is much easier to accept this. Yeah, I was 1 year ago in Portugal. We met some minister, and they were totally enthusiastic. Socialist minister. Yeah, we are doing even more renewables, more solar power, and so. And then I returned to Europe, and then I had a meeting with one of the representatives of the German industry, which also invests in Poland. Yeah, and he said to me, hey, it will be difficult what you demand. This is not so good for our sector. And say, I was in Portugal. They are enthusiastic about this. And he said, yeah, because they have a sun and no industry. Yeah, so so also for Georgia, it would be not. It would be a process, which was a chance. Yeah, but you have a well-educated young generation. It is the questions of also to find a market and to, but look at my country. 2004, when we joined the European Union, our unemployment rate was 20%. Yeah, and many young Poles went to Great Britain and so forth to work. Yeah, now they are returning. Yeah, also from United States. They have a small or big companies and so. So it's a. If you ask, also there would be also some problems, some negative issue, like let's say this transformation, energy transformation. Yeah, for instance, we would like to have a nuclear power. I don't know, is a nuclear plant in? And there was a big quarrel in Europe between states if nuclear plants, yeah, are good for Green Deal, or can we say that it's sustainable development or not? Yeah. On the end, because France was for it, they decided, yeah, it is. And for many of our specialists, they would say, we need this in the future. So Georgia, I think, I am sure that when you join the union, and then I will be then here the couple of years later, that you will be developed very, very well and very soon. Yeah.
თუ არის შეკითხვა, გავითვალეს უკაცრავად ეს თან გავითვალისწინოთ, რომ ჩვენ ნელ-ნელა უკვე უნდა დავამთავროთ, იმიტომ რომ შემდეგი შეხვედრა იწყება აქ ამავე დარბაზში და ბრძანეთ.
Hello, my name is I'm studying international relations. I have two questions for you. First of all, I am interested in the European role in promoting human rights and democracy beyond borders. And second of all, what are some of the biggest challenges currently facing in the European Union?
Can you repeat, because speak a little up, yeah, because
I'm interested in the European role in promoting human rights and democracy beyond borders. And second of all is what are some of the biggest challenges currently facing in European Union? Thank you.
Yeah, about human rights. This is the once again I can repeat that the European Union is not only institution, not only law regulation, but this law also expresses some values. Yeah, and of course one of this the human rights. Yeah, and this. And I think intuitively we know what does it mean, yeah? Like also rule of law. We are against arbitrary power. We are against, the one of the death sentence or torture of the people, yeah, and so on. So this is actually acknowledged for something what today in this political sense, but it is also general sense, means Europe. The problem, of course, is in details, because it is the questions: what does it mean? What right do I have? Yeah, and we have a process, and you probably know this from the philosophy for your study, that we extend this right. Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes there are, some would say that there is a kind of the inflation of the rights. Yeah, we can say everything is something from what we can consider to be human rights, and this is like in other cases. I give you like an example. In the Article 2 of the treaty, which is always refer to this article because it should constitute this express these values. Yeah. For instance, when we say equality between men and women, this is the question: what does it mean when we say the same wages? Yeah, the same. For the same job, you receive the same money. And we look precisely, then in my country, it is much more equal between men and than, let's say, in the Western Europe, in German. Yeah, yeah. In the other sense, but some say, okay, this equality means that the genders are the same. Yeah, that we try to change the traditional role. So. Maybe it is not proper understood equality. Yeah. So it's the other example: human dignities. Yeah, we in Europe we would like to preserve human dignity. And once I said to my colleagues, also during the other representatives of civil society, yeah, but we differ in Europe what human dignity is. Yeah. For instance, for many Europeans now, in Belgium, for instance, human dignity means that you have right to choose your moment of your death. Yeah, euthanasia. Yeah, according to me, it is against human dignity. Yeah, and then we are. I think the problem is, once again, to summarize this with the human rights. We all understand what are the basic human rights, and that should be preserved. This is very important. The political problem, begins with when we started. We all accept that there's something like human dignity, but the question is, what does it mean concretely? Yeah. For instance, one of the very contentious everywhere in the West, also in the United States, the questions of abortion. It is. Some of them say it's a self-determination of women, and the other would say no, it's against some principle of the life protection, of the dignity of human, and so this is not quite easy, but this is what what I say, what the diversity means, and this is why actually we would also to preserve the competences of the member states. Yeah. Another example, once Ursula von der Leyen said, in the Union it should be so that if a couple for the group, a couple is considered in one country to be a marriage, it should be considered a marriage in the other country. Yeah? And the problem is that, as you probably know, there are countries in which, more and more countries which say, okay, the same sex, the same gender couple can be married. Yeah. And there are countries, like in my country, which is not, this is in the constitution say the marriage is the relation between man and woman. And there's the question, it is violation of the human rights if we say something like this, or to have we right to define this. The violation of human rights would be persecuted of the people. So it's, yeah, this, let's say, these are very complicated ethical but also political progress, and the best solution is to say let the countries, nation decide how they would solve this problem. So in Belgium there's euthanasia is allowed. In other countries it's not. In Germany there's a big discussion about this. Yeah. So. Yeah, the biggest challenge for Europe, the second question, I think this, evidently these questions of the war, yeah, on the Ukraine, how it's, because it's of the frontier of the Union. There's a questions of the big challenges, green transformation, because you probably know that Europe would like the Union achieve the zero emission economy 2050, and there's a question, is this realistic, is this not realistic, and this climate policy is actually something which also has impact on all other spheres of the life. Yeah. Just recently there was a big controversy because there was a proposal that there would be a prohibition of the registration of the new car which combustion machine, yeah? So only electric and maybe hydrogen or something cars should be since the 2030, yeah. So it's and this is very, let's say, very ambitious program, very radical. And there are, of course, a big, sometimes skepticism if we can really make such a transformation. The other, this is what I said, that there are different nations in a different situation. Yeah, for instance, Italy's economy is quite weak now. It was, and there's a pressure of migration, which is this is a very big challenge, you know, especially in the south of the country. So it's a lot, and also these differences between the states concerning, you know, way of life and so on. So as I say, it is not that you know, entering the union is the end of all problems, but there are some chances, but there are also new problems for like for instance, huge emigration. We had 2004 really huge emigration was a part of the in many countries, Bulgaria, for instance, there's a huge migration. There's also the questions, if you have single market, then you have to compete with the other. You have no possibility to limit this or to control this international trade, yeah, because it's in competences of Union. Now in Poland we had a very big problem with the agriculture products from Ukraine, especially yeah, corn, yeah, and the problem is this is in competences of the Union, but at the moment the Polish government decided, to stop this or to close this, and then there was a negotiation with the Union. This was accepted. So there are actually every day and every week there are new problems with you are confronted with. But these are big challenges I mentioned. Yeah, migration, war, green transformation, and so on. Yeah.
ბავშვო, დროის გამო ერთი შეკითხვის საშუალება გვაქვს, თუ ძალიან გინდათ. თუ არა და შეგვიძლია მადლობა გადაუხადოთ. გააქვთ შეკითხვა? აი, გამოზომილად გქონიათ შეკითხვები? კარგით, ასე ლასკოში.
I would say, first of all, history, how he is one of the ancient cities in Europe, yeah, so it's, and we went to the museum here in the city. Then I am very interested because also in our ties, also historical ties, Poland and Georgia. We probably, I don't know if you know, but there were Georgian officers in Poland in 1939. There was a program also for the Polish government before the war to support Georgia. But also, according to this historical ties, there was a Polish participant in the Polish national uprising who were sent here to Caucasus as a, as a kind of deportation, and sometimes also involuntary in the Russian army. So in this sense, we have a common history, yeah, to be in the periphery of aggressive empire, yeah. We on the western, you in the south. And the other, of course, other traits, but also mountains and social history, of course, very good food, so in general, I would say, you see, I like Europe very much, but I like Europe because it's diverse. You go to Germany, you read literature, the history, and that they think something different and react different to some things than the let's say, Polish people. And you go to France, and France is different. And in this sense, I would say also Georgia is a different country which can contribute to to this, to this
diversity.
Yeah, to this diversity, that Europe is so colorful, yeah, and you are important color in this mosaic, yeah.
დიდი მადლობა და თუ გაქვთ კიდე 1-2 წუთი ჩვენ უნივერსიტეტის საპატიო დოქტორად ვირჩევთ ბატონ ზდისლავ კრასნოდევსკის და ბატონი რექტორი თქვენი თანდასწრებით თუ წინააღმდეგი არ ხართ გადავცემთ ამ ჩვენთვის უფრო დიდი პატივი არის ასეთი ცნობილი ადამიანი ჩვენი საპატიო დოქტორი ხარ, მაგრამ თვითონაც ძალიან გახარებული არის და ეს ცერემონია შევასრულებთ თქვენი თანდასწრებით ახლა თუ ძალიან არ გეჩქარებთ.